behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where every smile is practiced and every word is measured, some truths are too dangerous to speak. What happens when the person sworn to protect the crown witnesses something that could change everything? When loyalty meets conscience and silence becomes both a burden and a weapon. This is the story of a crisis that never made headlines, a struggle that unfolded in shadows, and a guard whose oath was tested in ways no training could prepare him for. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones the world never hears. Until now. The morning fog clung to the windows of Buckingham Palace like secrets refusing to be revealed. Sergeant Michael Thompson had been standing guard for over 15 years, but this Tuesday felt different. His polished boots clicked against the marble floor as he took his position outside the king's private study, a room where the most sensitive conversations of the realm took place. At 42, Michael had seen 3 monarchs during his service. He understood the weight of his uniform, the meaning of his silence, and the price of his loyalty. His wife, Sarah, often joked that he kept more secrets than the Queen's diary, but she had no idea how true those words really were. The first sign that something was wrong came at exactly 9:15 in the morning. King Charles, usually punctual to the minute, was late for his daily briefing with the Prime Minister. Michael had been instructed to escort the PM to the study, but the king was nowhere to be found. This was unusual because His Majesty never missed important appointments, especially ones concerning national security. Michael checked his watch again and decided to investigate. He walked through the familiar corridors, his trained eyes scanning for anything out of place. The palace staff moved about their duties with practiced efficiency, but there was tension in the air that even the most formal training couldn't hide. He found the king in the private gardens, sitting alone on a weathered stone bench that had been there since Queen Victoria's time. Charles was staring at an unopened envelope in his hands, his face pale and drawn. The morning light revealed stress lines that the palace photographers usually managed to hide with careful positioning and lighting. "Your Majesty," Michael approached carefully, his voice respectful but concerned. "The Prime Minister is waiting for you." Charles looked up, and for a moment, Michael saw something he had never seen before in the king's eyes: genuine fear. Not the kind of nervousness that came before public speeches or difficult meetings, but deep, bone-chilling fear that seemed to shake him to his core. "Michael," the king said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been protecting this family?" 15 years, Your Majesty. Since I was 27. Charles nodded slowly, still holding the envelope. "In all that time, have you ever wondered what happens when the protector needs protection?" The question caught Michael off guard. In all his years of service, he had never heard the king speak so personally, so vulnerably. There was something about this moment that felt like crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. "I'm not sure I understand, sir." Charles stood up, the envelope crumpling slightly in his grip. "There are things, Michael, that even kings cannot control. Forces that move in shadows, people who believe they have the right to decide the fate of nations." He paused, looking directly into Michael's eyes. "What would you do if you discovered that everything you believed about duty and service was built on lies?" Before Michael could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. 2 men in dark suits appeared from the palace, their faces serious and purposeful. Michael didn't recognize them, which was unusual because he knew everyone who had regular access to the private areas of the palace. "Your Majesty," one of them called out, his tone polite but firm, "we need to discuss the contents of that letter." Charles's hand tightened around the envelope, and Michael noticed the king's other hand was trembling slightly. In that moment, Michael realized he was witnessing something far more significant than a delayed meeting or royal nervousness. "Gentlemen," Charles replied, his voice regaining some of its royal composure, "I wasn't aware we had an appointment scheduled." "Some matters don't require appointments, sir," the second man said, stepping closer. "Especially matters of national security." Michael's training kicked in immediately. These men might be wearing suits and speaking respectfully, but everything about their body language suggested they were not here for a friendly conversation. His hand moved instinctively toward his radio, ready to call for backup if needed. "Michael," Charles said quietly, without taking his eyes off the two men, "I think it would be best if you returned to your duties." But something in the king's tone told Michael that he shouldn't leave. There was an urgency, almost a plea, hidden beneath the formal dismissal. After 15 years of reading between the lines of royal communication, Michael had learned to understand what wasn't being said. "With respect, Your Majesty, my duty is to ensure your safety. If you don't mind, I'll remain close by." The first man in the suit turned to Michael with cold eyes. "Sergeant Thompson, isn't it? We know about your service record. Very impressive. But this is a matter that requires privacy." The fact that this stranger knew his name sent alarm bells ringing in Michael's mind. These weren't random government officials or palace administrators. They had done their homework, which meant they had been planning this encounter. Charles finally opened the envelope, his hand steady despite the obvious stress he was under. As he read the contents, his face went from pale to ashen. Whatever was written on that paper was serious enough to shake a man who had spent his entire life preparing to bear the weight of a kingdom. "This is impossible," Charles said, his voice barely audible. "These allegations, they're completely false." "Are they?" the second man asked, pulling out a tablet and showing Charles something on the screen. "We have photographs, Your Majesty. Audio recordings. Financial documents that trace back to accounts that are very difficult to explain." Michael couldn't see what was on the tablet, but he could see the king's reaction. Charles stumbled backward slightly, catching himself against a stone bench. For a moment, Michael thought the king might collapse entirely. "This is fabricated," Charles said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to create false evidence." "Perhaps," the first man replied. "But in today's world, Your Majesty, the truth is less important than perception. These documents, real or fabricated, would be very damaging if they became public. The British people have very specific expectations about their royal family." Michael realized he was witnessing some form of blackmail or coercion. These men had something on the king, something serious enough to make the most powerful person in Britain look terrified and helpless. "What do you want?" Charles asked, the royal composure finally cracking completely. "We want cooperation, Your Majesty. There are certain policies, certain decisions that need to be made. Having the Crown's support would make things much easier for everyone involved. And if I refuse?" The second man smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Then these documents become public, and the monarchy faces a crisis that even your family's centuries of survival skills might not overcome." Michael's mind was racing. Should he call for security? Should he try to record this conversation? Should he intervene directly? His training had prepared him for physical threats, but this was something entirely different. This was psychological warfare against the crown itself. Charles sat back down on the bench, the weight of the situation clearly overwhelming him. "How long do I have to consider this?" "We're reasonable people, Your Majesty. We'll give you 48 hours to review the full dossier and make your decision. But understand that this offer of cooperation will not be extended indefinitely." The two men began to walk away, but the first one turned back. "Oh, and Your Majesty? We trust that this conversation will remain private. It would be unfortunate if certain people began asking questions about matters they couldn't possibly understand." After they left, Charles remained on the bench, staring at the envelope and tablet that had been left behind. Michael had never seen anyone look so defeated, so utterly alone. "Your Majesty," Michael said softly, "is there anything I can do?" Charles looked up at him with eyes that seemed to have aged years in the span of minutes. "Michael, you've sworn an oath to protect the crown, haven't you?" "Yes, sir. With my life, if necessary." What if protecting the crown meant protecting it from itself? What if the greatest threat to the monarchy came not from revolutionaries or terrorists, but from the truth? Michael didn't know how to answer that question. In all his training, No one had prepared him for a scenario where the king himself might be compromised, where loyalty might require choosing between the person and the institution. I don't know, Your Majesty, but I do know that whatever is in those documents, whatever those men think they have, there has to be a way to fight back. Charles managed a weak smile. You still believe in the system, don't you, Michael? You still believe that right always wins in the end. I believe in you, sir. I believe that whatever this is about, there's more to the story than what those men presented. For the first time that morning, Charles seemed to find some strength in his voice. There's more to the story, Michael. Much more. But telling it might destroy everything my family has built over generations. The king stood up, straightening his shoulders and recovering some of his royal bearing. But Michael could see that something fundamental had changed. The burden that Charles carried was no longer just the weight of the crown, but something much more personal and dangerous. We should return to the palace, Charles said. The Prime Minister will be wondering where we are. As they walked back through the gardens, Michael's mind was filled with questions he couldn't ask and concerns he couldn't voice. He had witnessed something that could change everything, but he had no idea what to do with that knowledge. The fog was beginning to lift from the palace windows, but Michael felt like he was walking deeper into a darkness that might never clear. Whatever crisis had found the king, it was only the beginning. And somehow, Michael knew that his oath of loyalty was about to be tested in ways he never imagined possible. The day that had started like any other had become the first day of what felt like a war. A war fought not with weapons or armies, but with secrets and lies, where the battlefield was truth itself, and the casualty might be the very institution Michael had sworn his life to protect. The following evening, Michael found himself doing something he had never done in 15 years of service, questioning his orders. He sat in his small apartment in Pimlico, staring at his service medal and trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. His wife Sarah was visiting her sister in Manchester, which meant he was alone with thoughts that seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. His secure phone buzzed with a message from Palace Security Command. Report to the King's study at 0600 hours. Private detail. Tell no one. The message was signed with proper security codes, but something about it felt wrong. In all his years of service, Michael had never received orders quite like these. He arrived at the palace before dawn, the London streets still empty except for early shift workers and the occasional taxi. The familiar weight of his weapon felt different today, less like protection and more like a question mark. What exactly was he protecting, and from whom? The king's study was dimly lit when Michael entered. Charles sat behind his grandfather's desk, surrounded by papers that looked nothing like the usual governmental briefings or ceremonial documents. These papers looked older, more personal, with handwritten notes and what appeared to be family photographs from decades past. Michael, Charles said without looking up, close the door behind you and activate the privacy settings. Michael followed the instructions, sealing the room from any possible electronic surveillance. This was a protocol usually reserved for discussions of national security or sensitive state matters. Your Majesty, you asked to see me? Charles finally looked up, and Michael was shocked by his appearance. The king looked like he hadn't slept, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of stress that no amount of royal training could hide. I need to tell you a story, Michael. A story that began long before I was born, but one that now threatens to end with me. Charles gestured to a chair across from his desk. Please sit. What I'm about to share with you will change how you see everything. The monarchy, your service, perhaps even your own life. Michael sat down, his training telling him to remain alert while his instincts warned him that he was about to learn something he might wish he never knew. My grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, once told me that the greatest burden of the crown was not the weight of responsibility, but the weight of secrets. I didn't understand what she meant until yesterday. Charles picked up one of the photographs, a black and white image of a young man who looked remarkably like Charles himself. This is my uncle, Prince William, who died in a plane crash in 1972. Officially, It was a tragic accident during an air race. Unofficially, Charles paused, his voice catching slightly. Unofficially, he was murdered because he had discovered something that powerful people needed to keep hidden. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Royal family deaths were always scrutinized, but he had never heard anyone suggest that Prince William's death was anything other than a terrible accident. What had he discovered, Your Majesty? Charles pulled out another document, this one looking official, but with sections that had been blacked out. In 1971, my uncle stumbled upon evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, intelligence services, and international finance. He discovered that certain members of Parliament, working with foreign agents, were using their positions to manipulate British policy for personal gain. That sounds like treason, sir. It was treason, Michael. But it was treason committed by people with the power to rewrite history and eliminate anyone who threatened to expose them. Charles stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where their conversation had begun the previous day. My uncle tried to bring this information to my mother, but he died before he could present his full evidence. Michael was beginning to understand the magnitude of what Charles was sharing with him. And you believe the same people are still active today? I know they are, Michael, because yesterday they showed me updated versions of the same conspiracy my uncle died trying to expose. The names have changed, the methods have evolved, but the fundamental corruption remains the same. Charles returned to his desk and pulled out the tablet the men had shown him the previous day. They have photographs of me meeting with people I've never met, financial documents showing transactions I've never made, and recordings of conversations I've never had. But the fabrication is so sophisticated that proving they're false would be nearly impossible. Why are you telling me this, Your Majesty? Charles was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming silently on the desk. Because, Michael, I believe they intend to kill me, just as they killed my uncle, just as they've killed others who got too close to the truth. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Michael had trained for external threats, terrorist attacks, public disturbances, but the idea that the King of England might be assassinated by his own establishment was something that challenged every assumption he had about his role. With respect, sir, if that's true, we need to contact security immediately. We need to implement full protection protocols and investigate these threats. And tell them what exactly? That I believe I'm being blackmailed by a conspiracy that has been operating for over 50 years? That I think my uncle was murdered by people who may still be in positions of power? Charles shook his head sadly. Michael, these people have survived and thrived for decades because they're smart enough to make anyone who opposes them look crazy or unreliable. Michael realized that Charles was trapped in a situation where any action he took could be used against him. If he went public with accusations, he would be dismissed as paranoid or unstable. If he tried to investigate quietly, he risked exposure and elimination. What do they want from you, sir? They want me to use my influence to support certain political decisions, military contracts, international agreements, domestic policies that will benefit their interests. In exchange, they'll keep their fabricated evidence private and allow me to continue being king. And if you refuse, then I become the scandal that destroys the monarchy. They release their false evidence. I'm forced to abdicate in disgrace, and the crown passes to William under circumstances that would make him completely dependent on the same people who destroyed his father. Michael was beginning to see the full scope of the trap. These people weren't just threatening Charles personally. They were threatening the entire institution of the monarchy. There has to be another way, Your Majesty. There has to be someone we can trust, someone with the power to investigate this properly. Charles walked back to the window, his reflection ghostly in the morning light. My uncle thought the same thing, Michael. He believed in the system, believed that good people in positions of authority would listen to the truth and act on it. He was wrong. But things have changed since 1972, sir. We have different technology, different legal protections, different ways of exposing corruption. We also have different ways of covering it up, Charles replied. These people have had 50 years to perfect their methods. They've learned from every mistake, anticipated every possible response. Michael stood up, his sense of duty overriding his fear. Your Majesty, regardless of how powerful these people are, you're still the King of England. That has to count for something. There have to be people in the system who would risk everything to protect the crown. Charles turned around, and for the first time since their conversation began, Michael saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. There might be, Michael, but identifying them without exposing ourselves would require careful planning and absolute discretion. We would need to build a network of people we could trust completely, people who understand that they might be risking their lives to preserve something larger than themselves. I understand that risk, Your Majesty, and I accept it. Charles studied Michael's face carefully, as if trying to read the depth of his commitment. This isn't just about following orders anymore, Michael. This is about choosing to stand against forces that have the power to destroy anyone who opposes them. Are you certain you're prepared for that? Michael thought about his oath of service, about 15 years of dedication to protecting the crown, about what it would mean for Britain if the monarchy fell to corruption and blackmail. I'm prepared, sir. Tell me what you need me to do. Charles nodded slowly, then walked to a wall safe that Michael had never noticed before. From it, he retrieved a small device that looked like a sophisticated recording unit. My uncle left behind more than just theories and suspicions, Michael. He left behind names, dates, and evidence that he had hidden before his death. This device contains his complete research, updated with information I've gathered over the years. Michael took the device, feeling its weight as both a physical object and a symbol of responsibility that went far beyond his normal duties. We're going to need help, Michael. People with specific skills and access to resources that neither of us possess. But we have to be extremely careful about who we approach. One mistake, one person who can't be trusted, and we'll both end up like my uncle. Do you have anyone in mind, sir? Charles pulled out a list of names, each one written in his own handwriting. These are people I believe we can trust. Some are in government, some in intelligence services, some in private security. But we can't approach them directly. We need to find ways to gauge their loyalty without revealing our purpose. Michael studied the list, recognizing some names and wondering about others. This will take time, Your Majesty, and we only have 48 hours before those men expect an answer. I know, Charles replied, which is why we're going to have to take some risks. I'm going to tell them I need more time to review their materials. It will buy us a few more days, but it will also make them more suspicious. What happens if they refuse to give you more time? Charles was quiet for a moment, then met Michael's eyes directly. Then, we'll have to be prepared for whatever comes next. And I need you to understand, Michael, that from this moment forward, we're not just serving the crown, we're fighting for its survival. As Michael left the study that morning, the device hidden securely in his jacket, he realized that his life had changed completely. He was no longer just a guard protecting a building or even a person. He had become a soldier in a war that most people didn't even know was being fought. The next few days would determine whether the British monarchy survived as an independent institution or became a puppet of shadowy forces that had been manipulating events from behind the scenes for over 50 years. And somehow, the fate of it all rested in the hands of a king who looked more frightened than powerful, and a guard who had never imagined that his oath of loyalty would lead him into the darkest corners of power and corruption. Walking through the palace corridors that morning, Michael understood that he was no longer just witnessing history. He was about to help write it. 3 days later, Michael found himself in a situation he never could have imagined. He was sitting in a secured room beneath the Houses of Parliament, surrounded by people whose existence he wasn't supposed to know about, discussing plans that could either save or destroy the British monarchy. The room felt like something out of a spy novel. No windows, walls lined with materials that blocked electronic surveillance, and furniture that looked both expensive and completely anonymous. Around the table sat 5 individuals that Charles had identified as potentially trustworthy, though Michael wasn't entirely certain that trust was the right word for what they were about to attempt. There was Margaret Hensley, a woman in her 60s who had spent 40 years working in various intelligence agencies and now held a position so classified that her business cards simply said civil servant. Next to her sat Commander James Wright, a naval intelligence officer whose military record was impressive enough to be mostly classified. Across from them, Dr. Sarah Chun represented the newer generation of government service, a cybersecurity expert who had helped expose several international corruption networks. The fourth person was perhaps the most surprising. Lord Frederick Ashworth was a member of the House of Lords who, according to Charles, had been quietly investigating governmental corruption for over a decade. His presence suggested that the conspiracy they were fighting had enemies even within the establishment it had infiltrated. The fifth person was Michael himself, feeling completely out of his depth but determined to see this through. "Gentlemen, lady," Charles began, his voice carrying the weight of both authority and desperation, "what I'm about to share with you is information that cost my uncle his life and may cost us ours. But the alternative, allowing the crown to become a puppet of corrupt forces, is unacceptable." Over the next hour, Charles laid out everything. The original conspiracy his uncle had discovered, the evidence that had been gathered over 50 years, the current blackmail attempt, and the sophisticated fabricated evidence that threatened to destroy the monarchy's reputation forever. Margaret Hensley was the first to speak when Charles finished. "Your Majesty, if even half of what you're describing is accurate, we're dealing with a network that has successfully operated at the highest levels of British society for decades. These aren't amateurs or opportunists. These are professionals with resources and connections that reach into every major institution. Which is exactly why we need to be smarter than they are," Commander Wright added. "They've survived this long because they've always been able to control the narrative and eliminate threats before they became public. We need to change those rules." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her laptop already open and running programs that Michael didn't recognize. "Your Majesty, the fabricated evidence they showed you. I'll need to examine it carefully, but if it's as sophisticated as you describe, it means they have access to state-level technology and expertise. This isn't just a British conspiracy. There are likely international connections." Lord Ashworth nodded grimly. "I've been tracking suspicious financial movements and political influence operations for years. If this is the same network I've been investigating, then we're looking at connections that reach into European governments, American intelligence agencies, and international banking systems." Michael listened to this exchange with growing alarm. When he had sworn his oath to protect the crown, he had imagined enemies that were clearly defined: terrorists, foreign agents, criminals. The idea that the greatest threat came from within the system itself was something his training had never addressed. "What do you need from me?" Michael asked, feeling obligated to contribute something to the discussion. Margaret turned to him with sharp, evaluating eyes. "Sergeant Thompson, your role is more crucial than you might realize. You have access to the king that none of us possess. You can observe and report on things that would be impossible for us to monitor. But more importantly, you're one of the few people in this room whose loyalty is beyond question." Charles spoke up. "Michael, I need you to understand that from this point forward, your primary duty isn't just to protect me physically. It's to help protect the integrity of the crown itself. That may require actions that go beyond your normal responsibilities." "What kind of actions, Your Majesty?" Commander Wright answered instead of Charles. "We're going to set a trap, Sergeant. We're going to give these people exactly what they think they want while secretly gathering evidence of their activities. It's dangerous because if they discover what we're doing, they won't hesitate to eliminate all of us." Dr. Chen looked up from her laptop. "I've been analyzing the metadata from the files His Majesty received. The good news is that I can prove they're fabricated. The bad news is that the fabrication is so sophisticated that convincing the public would require exposing state secrets and intelligence capabilities that we can't make public. So we can prove they're lying, but only by revealing information that would damage national security." Michael asked. "Exactly," Margaret replied. which means we need to catch them in the act of something that doesn't require classified evidence to prosecute. Lord Ashworth spread out several documents on the table. I believe I know how we can do that. For years, I've been tracking a series of government contracts that were awarded under suspicious circumstances. The financial benefits always seem to flow to the same network of companies and individuals. If we can connect these people to that network, we can prosecute them for corruption without ever mentioning the royal blackmail. Charles studied the documents carefully. You're suggesting we use their attack on the monarchy as bait to expose their broader criminal activities? Precisely, Your Majesty. We let them think you're cooperating, we gather evidence of their operations, and we expose them for crimes that have nothing to do with their fabricated evidence against you. Commander Wright pulled out what looked like a military planning document. Here's how it works. His Majesty agrees to their demands, but asks for specific details about what they want him to support. As they provide those details, they'll reveal their connections, their methods, and their broader network. We document everything, and then we strike simultaneously against all of them. Michael felt a mixture of excitement and terror. What happens if they discover what we're doing before we can expose them? The room fell silent. Finally, Margaret spoke what everyone was thinking. Then we disappear, just like Prince William did in 1972. These people have demonstrated that they're willing to kill to protect their operations, and they have the resources to make it look like accidents or natural causes. Dr. Chen closed her laptop and looked directly at Charles. Your Majesty, I need to ask you a direct question. Are you prepared to risk your life for this? Because once we begin, there's no going back. They'll either be destroyed or we will be. Charles was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs of his uncle that he had brought to the meeting. For 54 years, I've prepared to be king. I've studied history, learned about duty and service, and accepted that my life belongs to the British people. I cannot allow the crown to become a tool of corruption, even if preventing that costs me my life. Lord Ashworth smiled grimly. Then we're committed. But we need to be smart about this. We need communication systems they can't monitor, meeting places they don't know about, and contingency plans for every possible outcome. Over the next 2 hours, they developed a plan that was both simple and incredibly complex. Charles would appear to agree to the conspirators' demands, but every interaction would be carefully documented. Michael would serve as the primary communication link between Charles and the rest of the team, using his normal security duties as cover for their activities. Margaret would coordinate intelligence gathering, using her contacts in various agencies to track the conspirators' movements and communications. Commander Wright would handle the technical aspects of surveillance and evidence collection. Dr. Chun would work on proving the fabricated evidence was false while also hacking into the conspirators' own systems to find proof of their broader criminal activities. Lord Ashworth would serve as their contact point within the government, ensuring that when they were ready to act, they would have allies in positions of authority who could move quickly to arrest the conspirators and protect the evidence they had gathered. As the meeting ended, Michael realized that his role had evolved beyond anything he could have imagined. He was no longer just a guard. He had become a key operative in what might be the most important covert operation in modern British history. Walking back to Buckingham Palace that evening, Michael thought about his wife, Sarah, still visiting her sister and completely unaware that her husband had just committed to a course of action that could result in his death. He thought about 15 years of faithful service that had led to this moment, and about whether he would survive the next few weeks to see the results of what they were attempting. But mostly, he thought about the oath he had sworn and what it really meant to protect the crown. He had always assumed it meant standing between the king and physical danger. Now he understood that sometimes it meant standing between the crown and forces that wanted to control it from within. The next morning, Charles would contact the conspirators and tell them he was ready to cooperate. Michael would be there, as always, ready to serve and protect. But this time he would be protecting more than just a person. He would be protecting an institution, a tradition, and a principle that had survived for over 1,000 years. Whether they would succeed or fail, whether they would live or die, Michael knew that they were fighting for something worth the risk. And as he entered the palace grounds, he felt the weight of history on his shoulders, knowing that the choices made in the next few days would determine the future of the British monarchy for generations to come. The hidden crisis had become an act of war, and Michael Thompson, a simple guard from a working-class family in Leeds, had become a soldier in the most important battle the crown had faced in centuries. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin.